come to the front. Thank you. We'll get started in 5 minutes. Bad to say a Lutheran joke right now. Like, I feel like I'm in church because all the pews are open in the front. There's some pews in the front that are open. You can hear the pastor better from up here.
Okay. You know, the Catholic Church is like this too.
Is it?
Yeah. Everybody's way in the back and
Okay, sorry about the Lutheran joke. Joe just told me that the Catholic Church is the same. Everybody sits in the back too. Is that true, Caspers? Okay. All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming tonight to Fairmont Junior Senior High School. I think you're going to have a great time tonight listening to both Steph and, more importantly, listening to the other Joe. I had the pleasure this morning to go over to Martin County West to see Joe present to the Martin County West students, and he did a great job. By the way, go Hawkeyes. Okay, good. But anyway, thank you so much for coming tonight, and it's great to see all the different groups that were out in the lobby supporting this great community of ours. I know Joe's not going to admit this publicly, but I'm sure that the best group of students that he met with today were our high school kids here, right? Because we just have a great student body, and the culture of our school district is just very, very positive. And we appreciate that. We want to thank the parents, though, for setting the example at home for our wonderful kids. And we certainly appreciate the 1,700 students that Fairmont gets to serve on a daily basis. By the way, young lady, could you put your feet down? Thank you. Okay, Steph, you're up.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is Steph Johnson. There may be a few of you that don't know me, so I'll bore the rest of you with a couple of facts about me. So first of all, I just want to start off with a positive quote for the kids that heard this earlier. I should probably ask them and see if they could get points for saying what it is. But I always like to start any of my presentations or my day with some positivity. So I'd like to start off with saying, surround yourself with people who reflect who you want to be, who reflect how you want to feel. Energy is contagious. Good friends build you up. So remember that and surround yourself with people who build you up. Hopefully you're surrounded by people who are building you up here tonight. I am certainly built up by seeing such a great crowd. So thank you all for taking your precious time to be here with us tonight. It will be well worth your time. I guarantee it. As I said, some of you don't know me. My name is Steph Johnson. I am the coordinator for Martin County Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition, or we like to call it MCSAP. MCSAP Coalition, and we also have YOCO, our youth coalition, which is part of our coalition of caring adults and leaders in the community who are working together to build an environment that is safe and healthy for our youth. We are trying to encourage young people to be alcohol-free and drug-free all through high school, and smoking-free, of course. And just trying to make our environmental changes so that long after this grant, our young people in Martin County will be thriving and growing and being healthy. So thank you to the many people that are part of our coalition. I know I have a lot of coalition people that are here tonight. And if I could just take a minute and have you stand up if you are part of Martin County Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition. Please stand up. Don't be shy. All of these caring members and anyone that's on our youth coalition as well, stand up, because that's part of our coalition. And if you could all please give these wonderful people a round of applause. These are community members who are caring and who are working to make our environment better. So thank you all for helping us make this night, this dream of mine come true. I'll tell you, I saw Joe Schmit 2 years ago at a youth leadership academy where I was able to take 10 students from the Fairmont High School back when we were Fairmont Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition. That was our last grant. It was a state grant, and we went up to see Joe speak. He was our keynote speaker. And at the time, the students that were there said to me, wouldn't it be great if everybody at our school could hear Joe's message? And that just kind of put a light bulb on in my head, and I said, we bring these kids to all these great trainings, but it would be so great to have him come here and talk to all of them. And so today, it was a dream for us come true. Joe started off the morning at Martin County West and spoke to over 400 and some people over there, 7th grade through 12th grade and staff. Then he came here and spoke to Truman High School, 6th through 12th grade, Grenada Huntley East Chains, 6th through 12th grade, St. Paul's Lutheran, 7th and 8th grade were here. The ALC came over. We had the St. John Vianney, 6th grade, come over. And I'm not sure if I'm missing anybody else. Oh, all of the 6th graders from our public school, so about 125 6th graders as well. So we filled up about this amount, maybe a little bit fuller. And then in the afternoon, Joe spoke to all of our 7th through 12th grade students. And we filled up the whole place. We had 7th and 8th graders up in the balcony, and this whole area full. And they had a great time hearing Joe's message. So it has been a privilege to hear him speak all day today and to hear the kids interact with him. There are a few people that I just need to thank. When I was talking about bringing Joe here, I mentioned that he has a book that he wrote called Silent Impact, and I stopped in the library to see if our local library had it. At the time, they did not, but Jenny Trzynski was so excited about the book that she actually found a grant that helped us hold this event tonight, and it's a grant that helped make this possible through the Traverse Des Sioux Library System, and it's part of the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. So thank you to them. We should give them a huge round of applause for giving us money as well as the coalition to be here. Then there's a couple other people I need to thank as my sponsors. One of them is my husband, Rich Johnson, Culligan man, third generation Culligan man in Fairmont here. And Rich has given us water for this evening as well as helping us pay for some treats. And then Center for Specialty Care, Corey Walshland was very excited to bring Joe here as well. So thank you to them. So without further ado, I'm just going to welcome Joe Schmit. Enjoy.
Well, I'm glad this does remind you of church, because later on I'm going to take a collection. So just want to get that out there right now. It's so great to be here. I had so much fun with your kids today, and you should be so proud of the work that they're doing. I challenged them to dare to be different, to be fearless, to have courage, and to say no to drugs and alcohol and bullying and smoking and all the things that they know that they should say no to. And then I challenged them to make an impact, to make a true impact. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. Now, most of you may recognize me as the sports guy on Channel 5. For those of you who don't, you are looking at a living, breathing, broadcasting legend in Minnesota. Actually, my ratings are so bad that I'm in the witness protection program. They put me on Channel 5. They didn't think anybody would watch. So I'm a sportscaster, which means I've got the greatest job in the world. I get to cover the Minnesota Vikings, the Lynx, the Wild. I go to all the games for free. I sit in the press box, and when I'm there, they feed me. That sounds like a pretty good gig. But I'm here to tell you that my job can get difficult when the game ends. That's when I have to use all my skills and experience. Because I got to go into a dirty, stinky, smelly locker room and get half-naked men to say something intelligent. This is not always so easy. I'm talking to a baseball player. His team is qualified for the World Series for the very first time. So I say to him, what is this like? You're going to be playing in the World Series. You had to dream about this day since you were a little kid. And he looks up at me and he said, Joe, I can sum up how I feel in 3 words. It don't get no better than this. We're out at the Minnesota Vikings, Winter Park, where the Vikings train. And a veteran player gets cut during the middle of the season. So we go out there to find out what happened. How come the Vikings fired this player? He played a lot. So we're in the parking lot and the guy leaves the facility. We got the camera rolling. I got the mic in his face. I say, what happened? What happened? How come the Vikings cut you? He looks back and he says, no compliment, no compliment. A comment would have been nice. Last but not least, this is my favorite one. A college football player. The very first time he touches a ball in a game, he goes 100 yards for a touchdown. It happens on a kickoff return. So afterwards, we interview the kid. His eyes are as big as saucers. His heart's a pumping. His corpuscles are jumping. And we say, describe the play. He says it was great. I got the ball to the goal line. I ran up to the 20-yard line. I saw a big hole up the outside. That's when my instincts kicked in. It was like running from the cops. Now are you starting to feel my pain? I see a couple of cops back there. I might be able to outrun, but that's just saying. Oh, sorry, guys. I gotta get out of the city limits. Thank you guys for being here and for protecting me and being such fine public servants. So anyway, the truth is, like that football player I just talked about, each and every one of us in this room operates by our instincts. And those instincts lead to actions. And those actions either have a positive impact on the world around us, or they have a negative impact on the world around us. The problem is sometimes in this busy, crazy, hectic world, we sleepwalk from the mundane to the monumental moments of our lives without realizing that everything we do, everything we say, how we act, how we react, what our attitude is, what our body language is, it all leaves a mark. It all leaves an impact. And what we all need to do is to wake up and realize that we make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. Let me repeat that again. We make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. I call this concept silent impact. That's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. That's what I've written my book on. That's what I talked to the kids about earlier today. Silent impact. We make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. Now let me start you off with a question. If there were a going away party tonight in a group or organization you belong to, or maybe where you work, where you have some people that you gather around with, if there were a going away party tonight, who would the most people show up for? Think about that for a second, because that person is having a tremendous impact on your group or your organization. That person is a person we all kind of want to be. We went looking for this person, and we did research on companies, small, medium, and as large as Target Corporation itself. And we didn't find this person in the usual places. It wasn't always the person who sat in the corner office. Sometimes the person who had the biggest impact was the person who cleaned the corner office. But in each and every case, this person had 3 traits in common: purpose, persistence, and passion. Purpose, they aligned their actions with their values. They were always great team players. Persistence, they were persistent in their positivity, and they were always persistent in their preparation. And last but not least, they were people of great passion. They were the heart and soul of the operation because they simply cared. They not only cared about you as a coworker or a friend, but they cared about you as a human being. They wanted to be there to share in your successes, and they wanted to be there to support you when things didn't go well. You put them all together, purpose, persistence, and passion, and you get what I call an impact player. Now, I told the kids today, when I talk about an impact player on TV, what am I talking about? An impact player in sports is somebody who makes everybody better when they're on the field to play. Watch Zach Parise skate a shift for the Minnesota Wild. When he's on the ice, everybody's better. Watch Lindsay Whalen of the Minnesota Lynx play basketball for the 4-time world champions. When she's on the court, everybody's better. Well, you can be a person of impact when you become more aware and intentional with your purpose, persistence, and passion, because that's what those people do. I know a person who's an impact player both on the field and off the field. Joe Mauer of the Minnesota Twins. Told the kids this one before, so I told you there would be a couple stories you'd have to listen to twice. These kids did a great job listening. 15 years ago, Joe Mauer was a senior at Creighton-Durham Hall High School in St. Paul, Minnesota. Joe was the big man on campus. He was simply the greatest high school athlete the state of Minnesota has ever produced. Long before he was a 6-time All-Star, a 3-time batting champion, and a 1-time American League Most Valuable Player, Joe was a great athlete. He was recruited by every major college football program to be their starting quarterback. He was an all-state guard in basketball, led his team to 2 state basketball championships. But baseball was his best sport. And with the very first pick in the amateur baseball draft, the Minnesota Twins could have picked anybody, but they picked Joe Mauer out of Creighton-Durham Hall in St. Paul, Minnesota. Joe was the big man on campus. He was tall, good-looking, and soon to be very rich. I'd take any one of those 3 for 10 minutes. Every day after Joe's 4th hour class, Joe would walk a special needs student who happened to be blind to the lunchroom and invite him to sit down at his table, which had to be the coolest table in town. Where Joe Mauer sat, he was the big man on campus every day. And I asked Joe, I said, Joe, why did you do that? And Joe's answer was simple, but yet it was very profound. He said, because it was the right thing to do. I think you could say it was Joe's purpose. He was aligning his actions with his values, and because of that, it had a tremendous impact. So I started thinking, we make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. Who did this all have an impact on? So I found Mike Hawley, the young man who Joe walked every day to the lunchroom. And I said to Mike, I said, what did that mean to you? And Mike said, it was great. He said he was a senior, and he had never had a friend who was an athlete before. And now they sat every day with the athletes and they talked sports. And if somebody wanted to know how many points Kevin Garnett scored the night before, they would ask Mike Hawley because he was a walking encyclopedia of sports. And then I started thinking, who else did this have an impact on? So I found 6 guys who sat around that table 15 years ago in Creighton-Durham Hall High School every day with Joe Mauer and Mike Hawley. And then the story started to come in. They said that Joe would walk Mike to his next class once lunch was over. By the end of the first quarter, the guys in this lunchroom would fight over who got to walk Mike to his next class. Wednesdays was pizza day at Creighton-Durham Hall. And Mike would spill some crumbs on his clothing, some pizza sauce in his chin or his cheek. Joe Mauer would grab a napkin, wipe him off, brush him off, and get him ready for his next class. Before the end of the first semester, they were all doing this. These are high school kids, the most selfish creatures on God's green earth. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Not you guys who are here tonight. But Joe was having an impact. And the impact that he had was real, it was powerful, it was profound, it was contagious, and it can last a long, long time. When you talk to those guys who sat around that table 15 years ago, they talk about it as if it was yesterday. There was a teacher who was so inspired by what he saw in the classroom that he wrote a poem. And the poem's in the book. It was called Lunch with Mike. But the poem is really a dedication to Joe Mauer. It says in the poem, Joe, for the rest of your career, people will judge you by what you do with a bat and a ball. But they don't know you. I know you because of what I saw you do every day at Creighton-Durham Hall. You see, you can make an impact even when you're not trying to make an impact. And it can be positive or it can be negative. As a parent, you take your 13-year-old son or daughter to Valley Fair, the amusement park in Shakopee. And you look up at the prices and you see that 12 and under is $25 and 13 and above is $50. You turn to your 13-year-old and you say, you're 12 today. Now, we probably have all done that in some form or fashion. I'm guilty of that myself. But for $25, you just sold out on integrity. For $25, you just had a negative silent impact. I was at the state wrestling tournament one year. 2 undefeated wrestlers wrestling for the state championship. It was a fantastic match, decided on the last second on a controversial call that could have gone either way. One wrestler won, one wrestler lost. I happened to be sitting in the corner of the mat of the wrestler who lost, and as he's walking off the mat, I see his dad walking toward him. And I thought, here we go, this is going to be a great moment. His dad's going to hug him, and he's going to tell him how proud he is of him. That's not what happened, though. The dad went right by the son to yell and scream and holler and swear at the referee. What kind of impact do you think that had on that kid? How do you think that kid handles adversity as an adult? I think we all know. See, the impact we can have can be negative too. That's why we got to be careful. Sometimes you won't realize the impact that somebody has on you until many, many years later. I spent the formative years of my life living in a house that was connected to a bar. This bar was located in Seymour, Wisconsin. Does anybody know where Seymour, Wisconsin is? You were lost one day. Seymour, my high school was so small that we had driver's education and sex education in the same car. But that was, that's my PG joke for the day. Sorry about that. But I wanted to explain Seymour. Now this bar was not open 24/7, 365, but it was open early in the morning because it was in a small farming community. And when the farmers got done milking their cows and doing their chores, they came in for their happy hour, and they wanted to have a shot of whiskey and a beer and talk to the guy behind the bar, Schmit, my dad, a guy who was small in stature but big in personality. He kind of looked like a little Danny DeVito sitting behind that bar. My dad had a gift, and this was my dad's gift. He could make everybody feel like they were his best friend. Isn't that a wonderful gift? Each and every one of us in this room has gifts. Make sure you use your gifts. Use what you got to get what you want. My dad used his gift. But the truth was, my dad really only had one best friend, and his name was Mr. Leash. Now, Mr. Leash came to the bar quite often because he ran the local pop company. He brought in product all the time. He was kind of like the Culligan man, except he showed up on time. By the way, Ross Bernstein from Fairmont, Minnesota is one of my best friends in the world. And he's been a mentor to me in the speaking business, and I know the Culligan man is one of his best friends, so I felt I would take a shot in Ross's honor. So anyway, Mr. Leash was always coming to the bar, and I can remember when my dad and Mr. Leash got together, it was almost like they were brothers. They'd be laughing and joking and having a really good time. Well, this bar was also one of 3 places in town that had the fire alarm for the local volunteer fire and rescue unit. So when the fire phone rang, we knew something was up. And one day I was sitting in the bar with my dad because I'd like to spend time with him, and the fire phone rang. Except this time I noticed something was different. When my dad answered the phone, I saw something different. For the first time, I saw fear in my dad's eyes. I found out later that Mr. Leash, my dad's best friend, had been killed in a car accident. And I remember my mom and dad being very sad about that. Now, several weeks later, Mr. Leash had a son whose name was Donnie. Now, I was 9 years old at the time, and Donnie was 8. And I can remember when Dad would always bring Donnie to all of our family events. If we went to a family picnic, Donnie would come along. If we went to a hockey game, a basketball game, it didn't matter. My dad would always invite Donnie along. We had 6 kids in the family, and Donnie made 7. And I can remember going to my brother saying, I like Donnie, but why does Donnie always have to come along? I did not understand what my dad was doing. As I went through high school and went off to college and started my broadcasting career, I had lost total track of Donnie. I hadn't seen Donnie in a number of years. The next time I saw Donnie, I was 25 years old, and Donnie was crying. It was at my dad's funeral. And I can still see in my mind's eye Donnie crying at my dad's funeral. And a few years later, I heard a quote from Maya Angelou that took me right back to that moment. And she said, people won't remember what you said. People won't remember what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. My dad made Donnie feel good. You see, my dad's job as a best friend did not end when Mr. Leash died. Oh no, Mr. Leash now needed my dad more than ever. I think you could say my dad had a new purpose. He aligned his actions with his values, and because of that, it had a tremendous impact. It had an impact on Donnie. I didn't realize the impact it had on me until many years later. About a year before my father passed away, I had become involved in the Big Brothers, Little Brothers program, similar to the great kinship program you have down here in Fairmont. And I was matched with a little kid by the name of Jim. He was 8 years old from a single-parent family. We had a great relationship, and it worked out really well. And as I got more involved in this great organization, I started a charity golf tournament in the Twin Cities for Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And it ran for 16 years, and with the help of some great sponsors and volunteers, we raised a lot of money and awareness for this great organization. And about halfway through the run of the tournament, it ran for 16 years, Bob Mitchell, the executive director of Big Brothers Big Sisters, said, you know, Joe, through the years, your family has all come up to support you in your golf tournament. I've met your mom, and I've met your brothers, and I've met your sisters. I never had the chance to meet your dad. Tell me about your dad. I said, oh, Bob, you'd love my dad. And as I started talking about my dad, it hit me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. My dad had been a big brother to Donnie. He didn't have a group or organization around him. I wasn't even sure why I had become a big brother. Now I understood it 100% clearly. It was a silent impact that my dad had on me. Big Brothers, Big Sisters became a very big part of my life. As a matter of fact, I met my little brother Jim's second cousin. She's now the mother of my 3 children. Don't tell my wife. PG joke number 2, sorry. But anyway, it was such a great impact. So people ask, how can we have an impact? When we worked with the kids today, we did something that was very fun. We asked them to do impact resolutions. I figured out that people who make this impact are more intentional and they're more aware of the impact they have with everybody. So I started doing, instead of doing New Year's resolutions. How many do New Year's resolutions? Yeah. How many broke their New Year's resolutions by now? Yeah. I do impact resolutions. Every month I pick a term. I pick a trait that I want to work on and concentrate at and get really good at for that month. And on the first of every month I make a new trait. I wanted to be less jealous and petty the first time. Whenever you had that feeling, you fought it. This month I'm trying to be more patient. So we worked with the kids in this school and in Martin County, and we asked them to come up with some impact resolutions. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow up. I'm going to make a video every month the rest of the school year for the kids on what they came up with. And here are the impact resolutions that they came up with. So each month we're going to figure this out, which ones go where. But they talked about being friendly, kindness. This is how the kids thought you make an impact. And I'll tell you what, this works for adults too. Thoughtful, control your emotions, supportive, respect, open-minded, understanding. These were all out of your kids' mouths. And I know some of them are here tonight. Kindness, respect others, listening, positivity. So we're going to take those and we're going to make an impact resolution every month that the kids can do. And I tell you to go home with your kids and ask them what their impact resolution is. Maybe you can do it as a family. Then you'll really make an impact. So purpose, align your actions with your values, and you will always make a big impact. Persistent. People who make an impact are persistent in their positivity. They're persistent in their preparation. I remember the time I had to be the most persistent in my entire life. It's when I started dating. You see, I had a problem when I started dating. Every time I brought a girl home, I had a problem. My mom didn't like her. Every time. So finally I got smart and I went out and I found a girl that looked like my mom. She dressed like my mom. I know this sounds funky. She wore the same perfume as my mom. I brought her home and it was great. My mom loved her. But now I had a new problem. My dad didn't like her. So I told the kids about being persistent in your positivity and that positivity is a choice. And I told them to live by the 90-10 rule. That 90% of our lives, I think all of us can kind of look and say, you know what, 90% of our lives are good, if not great. And 10% of our lives need a little work. Where people get out of whack is when they spend 90% of the time on the 10%. Be persistent in your positivity and spend 90% of your time on the good stuff. On the good stuff. Sometimes life gets in the way of your pursuit of happiness. I don't know about you, but I like to take nice, long, hot showers. Sometimes I'm in the shower so long I can't remember if I shampooed my hair or not. What really ticks me off is I don't need as much shampoo as I used to need. Our police force certainly understands that in the back here. They all go to the same barber. So when I was in the shower, all of a sudden I noticed I had a lump on my chest. Well, I knew this wasn't normal. So I called my doctor, went in to see my doctor. Doctor looked at it and he said, Joe, don't worry, it's a fatty deposit. So I didn't worry. He said, let's send you down to see a specialist just to be double sure. Went down to see the specialist. Doctor said, don't worry about it, it's a fatty deposit. Well, as fate would have it, a couple of months later, I had already scheduled an executive physical down at Mayo Clinic because our insurance paid for it, and I thought that would be a good present to give to myself. I went down to Mayo Clinic. They took a look at the lump on my chest, and they said, don't worry about it, it's a fatty deposit. So I wasn't worried about it anymore. On the second day of my physical, the doctor said, Joe, if you don't mind, why don't we take a quick little biopsy of that thing? I'm 99% sure it's nothing. It was the fishing opener of the year 2008 because I knew as soon as I was done, I was heading up north to go fishing with some of my buddies. They took the biopsy. I went up north with my buddies. I didn't think about the biopsy at all. Got back to the office on Monday, and I got a call from Mayo Clinic. And I knew they weren't calling to ask me how the fishing was. I got the call that far too many people get, that I'm absolutely positive, that I know for a fact there are people in this room who have received the call themselves. The doctor said, Joe, you got cancer. You've got lymphoma. It's a blood cancer. You'll have it the rest of your life. You're looking at 2.5 years of chemotherapy. You can get through this, but it won't be a picnic. I knew at that moment that my life had changed forever. I knew at that moment I had a new mission. Remission was my mission. And I remember going into my office and thinking I wasn't scared and I wasn't mad, but I started getting nervous because I knew I had to start telling people. So I called my wife and I said, hey, I'll meet you at home. I said, for lunch. I met my wife at home for lunch because I knew I needed a hug and I knew she would need one too. When I got home, I came right out and I said, honey, Mayo called. I've got lymphoma. We hugged and we did what anybody would do after receiving such devastating medical news. We rushed into the house and we Googled non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because certainly the internet knows more about it than some rinky-dink operation down in Rochester, Minnesota. Now, the one thing they don't tell you when you get sick is how to tell your kids. That'd be the tough one. That'd be the tough one. And I remember for some reason we decided to tell our kids, 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, individually. My oldest daughter at that time was 15. The mothering type, she wanted to hug it out, she wanted to cry it out. My 13-year-old daughter, kind of a typical middle teen. She was like, how's this cancer stuff gonna affect me? I got a busy summer and I don't want this. My 10-year-old son, the minute we said cancer, he put his hand up, he didn't want to hear another word. And 2 days later, he asked his mom, he said, Mom, when Dad loses all his hair, will it grow back? So we knew we had to watch him. Now, a lot of amazing things happen when you have a crisis, a medical crisis. I had support from my friends, my family, my faith. I had people giving me all kinds of advice. They say, Joe, live every day like it's your last. You got the big C. So I did it for 2 weeks, and it was fantastic. But now I had 2 new problems. One, I was broke, and 2, my wife wanted a divorce, so I couldn't do that anymore. So I go down to Mayo Clinic, and I got to do a series of tests. So I'm sitting in the first waiting room, and the music on the music system is playing the theme from the movie Love Story. Now, I don't know if you're old enough to remember Love Story, but it was the saddest movie ever invented. For you youngsters, think about when Mufasa goes down in The Lion King. That's how sad this was. We go to the next waiting room, and they're playing Memories by Barbra Streisand, a funeral song. We go to the third waiting room. It's Louis Armstrong singing What a Wonderful World. My wife and I go stand by the elevator, and I said, if Josh Groban is on this elevator and he's singing You Raise Me Up, we are out of here. I knew that humor was going to help me stay persistent in my positivity when a lot and everything around me was negative. What keeps you positive? What is your trigger that keeps you positive when everything and everybody around you is negative? Whatever it is, use it because it's a fantastic weapon. So we go into the doctor's office. The doctor takes a look at the test, and he said, Joe, if you don't mind, he goes, why don't we wait to treat you in the fall? Your cancer's there, but let's just keep an eye on it. So now I had 100 days to get ready for chemotherapy. So I thought to myself, I can get ready. I'm going to pretend I'm going to make the high school football team at 49 years old. So I hired a personal trainer because I was going to get ready for chemotherapy. I had 100 days to get ready for it. I went from being able to do 17 push-ups to 61 push-ups. I was doing an hour 15 on the elliptical 4 days a week. 100 days later, I went back down to Mayo Clinic and I was ready to make the high school football team. I did all the tests all over again, walked back into that doctor's office, and it's where I learned the biggest lesson I've ever learned in my entire life. The doctor said, Joe, I don't know how to tell you this, but we're not going to treat you. He goes, your cancer's still there, but it's doing nothing. It's subsided since we last saw you. I'm not going to treat you right now. And here's the lesson I learned. I was mad. I was ticked off. I was so all in, ready to get rid of this bad stuff that good news sounded like bad news, and I didn't comprehend it. Now, 10 minutes later, I was doing cartwheels on the hallway of Mayo Clinic. But it tells you when you go all in, when you have the support of your friends, your family, and your faith, and you stay persistent in your positivity, amazing things can happen. Now, 2 years after my original diagnosis, I started getting lumps all over my body. We knew it was time to go in. Do you know that money that we donate to medical science? I'm here to tell you right now that it really, really works. Originally, I was scheduled for a combination of 5 drugs for 2.5 years. In the 2 years we waited to treat me, they came up with a new protocol for what I had. I was now going to get 2 drugs for 6 months. 4 months after my original diagnosis, remission was my mission, and my mission was accomplished. And at that point, there were 3 words to sum up how I felt. It don't get no better than this. Now, I am not brazen enough to stand here in front of you and tell you my attitude and my approach cured my cancer. I won't go there because it didn't. We all have lost far too many friends and family members and loved ones from this insidious disease. But I will tell you, your positive approach did not hurt. It did not hurt. And you know what helped the most? The people around you. The people around you. When they saw I was okay, they were okay. That's the power of being persistent in your positivity. You can have an impact. You can have an impact. Now I'm so doggone healthy that doctors want me to donate my body to science while I'm still alive. Too many times we get caught up in the destination that we don't enjoy the journey. My cancer journey was one of great learning. We learned so much along the line. When we told our kids individually, everyone reacted differently. One size does not fit all. Everybody responds differently to stress, to anxiety, to bad medical news, to crisis. And too many times we put our own judgments on people and how they should respond. We learned that that's not right because everybody responds differently. I remember sitting in the chemo room one day, and this lady sitting next to me, they're bringing her bags of chemo. And she says, "Here comes my poison." And I thought to myself, oh, lady, you got this all wrong. You got this all wrong. So when they brought me my bags, because this is where my head was at, I said, here comes the good stuff. Give me the good stuff that's going to get rid of the bad stuff. Because that's where I was, and that's where my mind was, and that's where I was going to beat this thing. And I said it loud enough that she could hear it. I'm not sure if it helped her or not. For all I know, they poisoned her. But I knew that that's how I was going to battle it. I knew it doesn't have to be something as big as a medical crisis to use the power of your positivity to change things. My wife and I have a friend who, whenever you see her in pictures, she looks fantastic. She's like perfect whenever you see her in pictures. So we finally said to her, said, Terry, how come every time we see you in a picture, you look perfect? She goes, I used to hate it when the camera came out. And I took terrible pictures. And I realized it was my frame of mind. So now when the camera comes out, I take a deep breath and I think to myself, I am beautiful. And it relaxes me, and the picture comes out, and I am beautiful. Now, I've tried this a few times. I went with I am Brad Pitt. It hasn't worked yet. But on Facebook, if you squint your eyes, there's one picture where I look like a chubby Johnny Depp, and I'll take that. I'll take that. The best way to get rid of your negativity, the best way to stay persistent in your positivity, I should say it this way, the best way to stay persistent in your positivity is by getting rid of as many negative things as you can in your life. Get rid of negative thoughts. We all have them. It's a vast wasteland up there. Figure out ways you can get rid of negative thoughts. Listen to the words you speak. You speak to your kids. Get rid of negative words. And last but not least, get rid of negative friends. Told the kids this one earlier today. My wife and I were out to dinner a few years back with some friends we hadn't seen in a while. We had a lot of mutual friends. And about halfway through the dinner, I realized this was one of the most negative experiences we'd ever had. They were talking trash about some of our mutual friends. They were complaining about the food. They were complaining about the service. They were bragging about their kids. And everybody knows my kids are better than their kids. No, it was a really negative night. And on the ride home, I said, honey, let's not go out with them anymore. And she said, why is that? I said, we only have so many nights a year we can choose who we spend our time with. We can't choose negative anymore. And we said no. We have not gone out with them since. Now let's be honest in this room. How many of you in the last calendar year, out of some sense of social obligation, spent some time with someone you really didn't want to? Raise your hand just a little bit. You can admit it. Yeah. If they're sitting next to you, don't look at them right now. But that is the best way to get rid of your negativity and stay persistent in your positivity. We've also found out that people who are impact players, people who make impact, they're also persistent in their preparation. I was covering the Minnesota Vikings the year that Denny Green became the head coach. As a matter of fact, it was the year I almost quit broadcasting. I thought I was going to become a millionaire. Yeah, I got the exclusive rights to the Randy Moss doll. It was great. I thought I was going to make millions off it. It stood like this tall. It was perfect. It had number 84. It was purple and gold. And it was just like him because you would wind it up and it would quit. Too soon? Opening night of training camp, Denny Green, first-year head coach of the Vikings, and I lined up Denny to be on our show, Sports Rep. Sunday night at 10:35, I got the brand new head coach of the Minnesota Vikings on our air. So we lit up Blakesley Stadium in Mankato, where the Vikings train. And we had 3 cameras, we had a satellite truck, and at 10:35, the new head coach of the Minnesota Vikings comes to sit on our air, on our set, for a half hour. About 5 minutes before Denny Green came out, a high school kid who was working that summer as a ball decides to come out and work out at the stadium. And I said to my guys, I said, I know exactly what that kid did. He called his buddies and he said, hey, watch Channel 5 tonight because whenever you see a shot of Denny Green, I'm going to be in the background running up and down the stairs. And sure enough, whenever we had a shot of Denny Green for the entire half hour, that kid is running up and down those stairs. I thought, well, you little. The next night, I'm live at the Vikings dormitory, the old Gage Hall where the Vikings stayed. 10:30 at night, I'm doing my sports from Gage Hall. When I got done wrapping up, I went walking back towards the hotel. Gage Hall was here. The football stadium we went live at the night before was right here. The cheap hotel that Channel 5 put me up in was right here. So I got done doing the sports, helped the guys wrap up the cables, put the cameras away, and I started walking towards the hotel. And as I got to the stadium, there are no lights on at the stadium tonight. There's not a head coach of an NFL team anywhere in sight. There's no cameras. All of a sudden I hear, ch, 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 ch. I go and I look, and there's that high school kid working just as hard as he had the night before when the cameras were there. I had it all wrong. Many of you in this room know who this high school kid is. His name is Larry Fitzgerald, Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals, a future Hall of Fame wide receiver. Good enough isn't good enough if you want to be great. And if you want to be great, you better be persistent in your preparation. I was in Kansas City the night that Paul Molitor became the 22nd player in Major League Baseball history to get his 3,000th hit. Think about that. Only 21 in the history of the game had ever done it before Molly stepped up to the plate that night. The next day, we got to the ballpark a little bit early because we had some satellite truck problems the night before. And who shows up at the ballpark early but Paul Molitor? And I said, Molly, what are you doing here so early? He goes, oh, I'm here for early batting practice. I don't like the way I'm swinging the bat right now. Early batting practice is for the subs, the rookies, the kids who are trying to make it. Here's a guy who was on the cover of every sports section in the country. The next day, back grinding and working just as hard. Is there any doubt in your mind how we got those first 3,000 hits? And you want to talk about a silent impact? What kind of impact do you think it had in those subs, those rookies, those guys trying to make it? We make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. And the impact we have is real, and it's powerful, it's profound, it's contagious, and it can last a long, long time. Be persistent in your positivity, be persistent in your preparation. You got a chance to make an impact. Last but not least, passion. Passion. Think about people you want to be around in your life, and I guarantee you, they're people of great passion. When I was a kid like these kids here, I was so passionate. I wanted to be a pro athlete. That dream died in Little League when I made history. I was the first player to ever be traded, and my dad was my coach. But somewhere along the line, I decided I'd use my big mouth and my love of sports to become a sportscaster. And I pinched myself because in my career, I've had one-on-one interviews with the greatest names of our lifetime. Muhammad Ali, Tiger Woods, LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Jack Nicklaus, Lindsey Whalen, Kirby Puckett, Brett Favre, on. And I've tried to figure out what do all these great athletes have that sets them apart. Well, they all have amazing God-given ability. They're all rich. But what they really all had was not only the passion to be the best, it was the passion to prepare to be the best. They didn't want to compete against somebody they knew they could beat. They wanted to compete against somebody that they knew could push them. I covered a boxer in Minnesota by the name of Scott Ledoux. How many of you guys remember good old Scotty Ledoux? Scott stepped in the ring with 8 heavyweight world champions. He lost all 8 fights. But Scott's best fight was against George Foreman. Now this was George Foreman before he invented the George Foreman grill and ate a whole bunch of double cheeseburgers off of that grill. George at this point was a lean, mean fighting machine. And Scott Ledoux from Andover, Minnesota stood toe-to-toe with this human wrecking machine for 8 rounds. In the 8th round, Foreman was able to poke Ledoux in the eye with his thumb. Scott's eyes swelled shut. He couldn't see anymore. The ref had to stop the fight. Later in the locker room, a doctor is examining Scott, and he looks at Scott and he says, Scott, I am really afraid you're going to lose your eye. And Scott looks up at the doctor and says, what's an eye when you've given your heart? What's an eye when you've given your heart? That's passion. That's passion. I hope that's the kind of passion you bring to your relationships, the passion you bring to your office, the passion you bring to raising your kids. People of passion make a great impact. I was doing this presentation to a group of Wendy's franchisees owners. And afterwards, a general manager came up and said, can I tell you about something that happened in my store? And I said, sure, absolutely. She said, every day an elderly gentleman would go through the drive-through window for breakfast. And every day he was waited on by the same woman. It was a lady who dropped her kids off at school early, came to earn the family a few extra dollars by working the drive-through window at Wendy's. And the GM said, I wish I had 100 of her. She was the best employee I ever had. When she said good morning, thank you, and have a great day, she meant every single word of it. Every single order that went out that window was perfect. I've never had this lady before at a drive-through window. One day, the elderly gentleman who had been coming for breakfast through the drive-thru window for a couple of months, parked the car and came into the restaurant and said, could I see the lady who's been waiting on me for the last couple of months? And the general manager said, sure. So out from behind the counter comes the lady. And the old man stands in front of her and he said, may I give you a hug? And she said, sure. And the guy gave her a big old burly bear hug, and he held on maybe a little longer and a little tighter than is possible. But when he let go, he said, I just had to come here and thank you today. You see, every morning when I was coming here for breakfast, I was on the way to the hospital to see my wife. And she went to the good Lord last night. But every day when I came in here, you reminded me of her before she got sick. Nobody ever left a conversation with my wife without feeling better about themselves. And that's what you did for me. It's called the second thank you, when you go back and thank somebody who's had a monumental moment in your life. If that person is in your life, go back and thank them. Go back and thank them. I challenged the kids this afternoon and this morning. I talked about the concept I have of a Mount Rushmore of influence. And I think if you picked up a flyer, you see the Mount Rushmore there. Because I think if you really want to have more impact in your life, on other people's lives, look at who's had an impact on your life. And why did they have the impact on your life? Was it because they were people of great purpose? They aligned their actions with their values? Were they persistent in their positivity and preparation? Or were they people of great passion? They probably were all of those. But figure out who you would put on your Mount Rushmore of influence. Now, I asked the kids to do this without putting mom and dad on there. And I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. And then I think what you want to do is you want to sit down with your kids and tell each other who's on your Mount Rushmore of influence and why, who had the biggest impact on your life. We did this exercise 2 years ago at the Youth Leadership Academy. And when the parents came in, I had parents coming up to me saying, I learned things about my kid I never knew. I turned around, I got kids saying, didn't know anything like this about my mom and dad. It was some breakthrough stuff. A connection was made that wasn't there before, because sometimes we don't look at that, who really had an impact in our life. So that's your assignment. Figure out who's on your Mount Rushmore of influence. Roy Griak was a longtime track coach at the University of Minnesota. He coached for over 30 years. He coached Olympians, he coached national champs, he coached Big Ten champs, had a very successful career. Roy was dying a few years back, and I started reading all the tributes to Roy on his Facebook page and on his Caring Bridge site. And something really hit me. Not one of those people who were Olympians and champions said, thank you for making me a champion. They all said, thank you for making me a better dad. I just did the biggest business deal of my life because of what I learned from you. I'm a better person today because I knew you. You see, the trophies, the awards, the money, none of it means anything. What means something is, did you have an impact? Did you lead a life of significance? And can you be more significant from this day forward by trying to be more aware and more intentional with your impact? I think we all can. I think we all can. You see, of all the research I've done, whenever I find a story about somebody who's had a big impact, I love to do the research, and I love to find who it all had an impact on, because the trickle-down effect is pretty amazing. But I've figured out a couple things. You need to make a connection in order to make an influence. And then when you influence, you make an impact. And influence is really the intersection of two very human traits. We all want to be liked, and we all want to leave a legacy. So why won't we work harder at it? And last but not least, this is the secret to the silent impact. Yes, we do make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. But this is the entire secret. It's when you realize it's not about them liking you. That's not it at all. It's about them liking themselves. And if you can be the person that helps make that happen, guess what? Someday you'll be up there on their Mount Rushmore of influence yourself. And when that magical moment happens, There'll be 3 words to sum up how you feel. There'll be 3 words to sum up how you feel. It don't get no better than this. Thank you so much, Fairmont. I had a great day. Thank you. Because I'm here and because Steph hasn't worn me out quite yet, I'd love to do a Q&A. If you got questions about the book, about the research I've done on Impact, you got questions about the Vikings, I can handle them all. But if you ask me a question about weather, I'm leaving. Oh, yes, okay, yeah, good light. Let's put Steph to work here. Does anybody have a question? His question was, are the Vikings going to win the Super Bowl? I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to tell you the Vikings are going to win the Super Bowl, but I will tell you the Vikings are going to go to the Super Bowl.
Woo!
There. Now, a lot of things can happen, but I've covered this team for 30 years, and I've figured out if you don't have a great defense, you can get beat. The Vikings have a great defense. They have 5 guys on that defense that could start for any team in the league. And they're believing in Mike Zimmer. I was telling some people earlier today, I had the great fortune of spending a day this summer down at Mike Zimmer's ranch. And I always like to, once the cameras were off and we're just sitting there talking, I said, Mike, describe leadership to me. You know, how do you know it works for you on a football team? And he said, okay, you've got a defensive end who wants 10 sacks. You got a quarterback who wants to make $15 million. You got a guard who wants to be an all-pro. And you got a receiver who wants 100 catches. And he said, you go to them, that's fine. But you tell them, the defensive end, you might only get 8 sacks. You tell the receiver, you might only catch 85 passes. But if we play as a team, we're going to go to the Super Bowl and we're going to win. And he said, as easy as that sounds, that's the secret to leadership. And that's what he tries to do. And believe it or not, being in that locker room enough, I think he's accomplished it. I think he's accomplished it. Yes. Wait just a second. She's got a microphone there.
Thanks, Steph. You mentioned faith a number of times in your talk. How important is your faith to you, and maybe how would you relate that to impacting people?
Yeah, you know, I do mention faith a few times because I do have a strong faith. I don't ever feel comfortable professing my faith. It's not my will, but it's a big part of who I am and what I do. As somebody told me, Joe, the name of your book, Silent Impact, is wrong. I said, oh yeah, what should it be? They said, it should be, what would Jesus do? And I said, yeah, you got a point. You got a point, because you know that's the way. The kids were talking about integrity today, and you know it's the old thing. Integrity is what you do when nobody's looking, and I think that's the same way with faith. So thank you for the question.
I realized one question that we never asked you, Joe. Who's on your Mount Rushmore?
Who's on my Mount Rushmore of influence? That's a very good question. Let me think. No. I told the kids, my high school football coach, Bill Collar, is he was a history teacher too, but I told the kids a story. He was the first guy that told me I could go to college. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college. When he told me I could go to college, I was going to college. John Campbell, sports director at KCRG TV in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It was my second job in TV, and I learned how to be a professional from him. Tony Dungy, because Tony Dungy, I got to cover Tony Dungy, and there's a guy who walks the walk and talks the talk. And I know I'm not supposed to put my parents on, but my dad is on. I lost my dad when I was very young, and I was 25 years old, and it had a huge impact on me for many, just all those years, because for some reason, I was always trying to please my dad, even though he wasn't here. So I lost my mom a few years ago, and I'm going to tell something. What happens when you start thinking about impact? all of a sudden you start seeing all these lessons. Not that you become any smarter, but you watch people and you become smarter because you don't want to do what they do. And at my mom's wake, and this is not meant to be a sad story, not meant to be a sad story at all. First of all, my brothers and I were standing there, and my mom was in a casket. And anyway, so we agreed that we hadn't seen a lot of people for a long time, so if we recognized somebody, we would say their name so all three of us would know their names. So this one lady comes up, Mrs. Pash. I'm going, oh, Mrs. Pash, how are you? And she goes, I'm vertical, as my mom is laying next to us horizontal. Not a good time to say that. Not a good time to say it. So that can be funny. We can have humor in that. But here's the lesson I learned. A lot of people were coming up to me telling me about when their mom died and how sad it was. And they started talking about their mom. I was like, my mom just died. So if something like that happens, ask them, what was your mom's best trait? What are you going to miss most about your mom? Make it about them. It's not about you. And sometimes people just say that because they don't know what to say. Make it about them. And no more funeral stories. But you got to find humor in that. That's the way I look at it. Any other questions?
Well, first, I wanted to say thank you for mentioning kinship. It's our mentoring program for Martin County. I know it's impacted a lot of people here in the room. And you kind of already spoke to this, but I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about how mentoring has affected your own life and then your experience as a mentor to others.
Thank you for the question. I think the biggest surprise most mentors have is that all of a sudden you start feeling guilty because you're getting more back than you think you're giving. And it's kind of one of the great secrets of volunteering. When you volunteer, many times you get more rewards back than you give. I'm still in contact with my little brother Jim. As a matter of fact, his mother passed away last month, and I went down to her funeral. So it's been a lifelong relationship there. But I also learned, I also had great mentors along the way. And I had some people in broadcasting who helped me out. And to this day, if anybody calls, if any kid calls from Fairmont, I guarantee you, if they want to come into the station, they'll come in, they'll spend a couple hours with me. I just do it all the time, just because people were there to help me out. If you don't pay it back, then you're being a complete fraud. Or I'll talk to them and help them out, just because I think that's what we're supposed to do. I think that's what we're supposed to do. Thank you so much. It's been great to be here. I'll be in the back and come take a picture, say hi. You can throw stuff at me, whatever you want to do. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to remind you there's a silent impact survey. If you could please fill this out for me. This really helps with our Drug-Free Communities grant. We need to collect data. And you can either drop it off at our Fairmont booth over there, or you can hand it to one of the ushers, whatever works. And there's great graffiti coffee, decaf and regular. There's some cookies. Feel free to visit, and thank you so much. And Joe will be in the back. He'll be selling his books at a discounted rate, and he'll also be donating to our cause for any books that he sells. Thanks for coming, everyone.